I've talked before about how each generation loves to turn on the art of the previous generation, but Rococo generated a response within its own generation from a middle class and sometimes aristocratic intelligentsia that was repelled by the frivolity and sensuality of Rococo art. This painting is David's Death of Socrates. Socrates, of course, is the most famous advocate of using reason to achieve both wisdom and virtue. The Athenian government accused Socrates of denying the gods and corrupting the young through his teachings. They offered him a choice of renouncing his beliefs or dying by drinking a cup of hemlock or poison. Socrates chose to drink the hemlock after discoursing for a while on the immortality of the soul with his grief-stricken disciples. David is the most famous neoclassical painter. We won't take him up until my next lecture, but let's stop for a minute and study this painting, which is not a required work. First, in what ways does this resemble and not resemble a Baroque painting? And I'll quickly flash a couple of Baroque paintings from the last unit just to stimulate your thinking. As always, I wish I could hear what you said. What struck me as a similarity, above all, is that this painting is highly staged. Maybe too staged. To me, it lacks a sense of movement, almost as if the director called out, "Freeze!" at the critical moment when Socrates is going to take his first deadly sip. Caravaggio captures a moment too, but I think he makes it a lot more plausible that Matthew is about to get out of his seat and walk out the door with Jesus. So what about the theme of this painting? Does it seem Baroque? Well, it's very serious. In this way, David does represent a return to the Baroque, and if anything, he ramps it up a level. His works are more ideological. David's heroes are very often giving up their lives, or, stay tuned for the French Revolution, somebody else's lives for a cause. But note that it's not a religious cause. Socrates is sacrificing his life for reason and for virtue. The French Revolution will revolt against Catholicism and indeed Christianity in the name of reason and virtue. But clearly there's nothing Rococo here at all. Nobody's wearing pink. In fact, no girls are allowed, which, as we saw with Lebrun, was rather the view of French revolutionary thinkers. So let's watch a brief clip from the Art of the Western World series, which introduces the French Enlightenment thinkers or philosophes and their attitude toward Rococo. As I mentioned in my last lecture, pardon the barking dogs, the 16th century had witnessed hugely important scientific discoveries. Isaac Newton, for example, first published his laws of motion in 1687. In the 1700s or 18th century, which is where we are now, a new generation of thinkers attempted to apply this science to political and social life, an effort that would eventually help spark revolutions in America and France. Meanwhile, a new generation of scientists and inventors was applying these new scientific discoveries to economic production, inaugurating the Industrial Revolution. Well, I assume I have now appalled Ms. Jacobs, who is a scholar of the Enlightenment, which I've just tried to sum up in a few sentences. So here's our first required work of the day. The British painting really captures the spirit of the Enlightenment. The philosopher is demonstrating an orrery, which is a device that illustrates how the planets revolve around the sun, and an exercise that gives the artist a chance to channel what earlier artist? All together now? Caravaggio, of course. So again, let's compare this with the Calling of Matthew. What's the most obvious similarity? Well, Wright employs the stark tenebrism of Caravaggio. So what's the biggest difference? Well, I don't know what you just said, but what strikes me is that in this painting, we see the source of light, and it's part of the mechanism, man-made, scientific, even industrial. Caravaggio's light is actually, I think, more ambiguous. It's probably coming from an open window, open door, but maybe, just maybe, it's coming from Christ himself. Note this painting's emphasis on the reforming power of education. The two children are fascinated by the exercise, and education is a big topic in the Enlightenment. I also think it's interesting that Wright seems to have allowed a woman to witness this scene. So here is a painting stripped of religion's mystery, yet it imbues science with some of religion's power to convert, to transform, to entrance. In place of St. Teresa or St. Matthew, transformed by a direct connection to the Holy Spirit or to God, we have ordinary people, especially children, transfixed by science. Joseph Wright of Derby is often described as the first painter of the Industrial Revolution, although I think his subject is as much the scientific revolution. Many of his paintings, including our required works, feature the Lunar Society, which is a group of very influential scientists and industrials who lived in the English Midlands. So this was not a London-based movement. This is up in industrial country. So here's another Wright painting quite similar to our required work, and it's therefore a real candidate for an attribution question. The painting depicts a natural philosopher, that would be a forerunner of the modern scientist, recreating one of Robert Boyle's air pump experiments. Basically, he's using a vacuum to deprive a bird of air. Well, we see a lot of reactions from the onlookers, but for the most part, they seem more curious than overcome with concern for the bird. The girl might be an exception. The central figure looks out of the picture as if inviting us to participate in the experiment, which is another way in which this painter channels Caravaggio. Wright himself hailed from Derbyshire, hence the name, in northern England, where coal and iron were beginning to transform the British economy. He trained in London but worked in the Midlands most of his life, and the new industrialists of that region were among his most enthusiastic customers. Two of his most important patrons were Josiah Wedgwood, who's credited with industrializing the manufacture of pottery, and Richard Arkwright, who basically created the factory system for manufacturing cotton cloth, is sometimes referred to as the father of the Industrial Revolution. So it's easy to understand why. Joseph Wright of Derby imbues science and industry with a dignity and reverence that usually in the past have been reserved for religious or for history painting. So he elevates industry and therefore the industrialist. So here's one last Wright painting, this time capturing a specific process that was important in the early Industrial Revolution. Note again the chiaroscuro, but also the man-made source of light. Also note how sympathetically laborers are portrayed. We'll see more of this toward the end of the unit when we get to realism. So just a reminder, this early 18th century work also displays a fascination with empiricism, probably belonged in this unit. The empiricism is, of course, appropriate for a daughter of a scientist, but this kind of incredibly detailed landscape painting or still life painting is also very typical of Dutch Baroque. So it could be put in either category, I think. Similarly, this Costa painting is a work of empiricism. Even if in this case, I hope we all find racial empiricism more than a little creepy. Remember that this was displayed not in an art museum, but in a museum of natural history. Okay, the story behind this painting and this woman is more complicated, although it clearly belongs in the Enlightenment. Now, I had never heard of this remarkable nun, so once again, thanks to the College Board, I am not always ungrateful for their list. The painting itself is a fairly conventional Baroque portrait, but with some important differences. So here on the left is another painting of Juana Enyas, which now hangs in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The museum website had this interesting notation. The inscription identifies the image as, quote, a faithful copy after a portrait that she herself made and painted with her own hand. So I hadn't realized that she was an artist as well, although I knew she was a musician. Note that both paintings prominently feature her nun's badge with its depiction of what scene? That's an Annunciation. We also see a combination of religious and intellectual imagery. She's surrounded by books or carrying a book and yet holding a rosary as well. And we see the cross on her sleeve in the left-hand painting. So, the Khan Academy essay noted that the paintings of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is quite different from other nun paintings, and that set me off on a hunt for nun paintings. I found this one that turns out to be by the same artist and pretty much the same time. Score! Saint Gertrude, by the way, was a German nun and a medieval saint, not an Enlightenment figure. She was known for her spiritual exercises, rather along the lines of Saint Teresa, but she was also an author. Both nuns are portrayed with a book, although I'm guessing St. Gertrude is probably reading a Bible a little anachronistically, since the printing press hadn't been invented in the Middle Ages. Both have quill pens, signifying their status as writers. Both wear religious insignia, although the Sacred Heart may not have been an actual part of St. Gertrude's wardrobe. So what differences do you see? Well, the most obvious one, and one that the Khan Academy podcast noted, is that Sor Juana Enyas is looking right at us, rather as Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun does in her self-portrait. So I was intrigued by this lady, and I dug around for more information. I couldn't find more information about this painting of Sor Juana as a young girl, but the inscription indicates that that's who she is, and it shows up on several websites about her. Sor Juana Enyas was an illegitimate child of a Creole mother and a Spanish father, and she grew up on her mother's father's estate. She was a child prodigy who, by her early teenage years, was fluent in Greek, Latin, and, I find this especially interesting, the native Aztec language, Nahuatl. She allegedly tried to disguise herself as a man to get admitted to university. That could be an urban legend. But at any rate, it didn't work. And at 16, she joined the court of the Viceroy of New Spain, the Marquis de Manchera, as one of his wife's ladies-in-waiting. When she was 17, the Viceroy assembled a panel of scholars to test her intelligence. And basically, she turned out to be that year's big Jeopardy winner. She impressed everyone. It probably didn't hurt that by all accounts, including this painting, she was beautiful as well as brilliant. But marriage was not a good path for someone who wanted to be a scholar, so Juana entered a convent instead. She first became a Carmelite, but that order's harsh discipline was too strict, not particularly congenial for study. It wasn't what she wanted. So her next order provided her with a study and a library. Obviously, they valued her scholarship and her literary skills. She became probably also her political connections. But at any rate, she became a famous but also a controversial poet. I've posted one of her poems in translation. Given that it rhymes, it's probably not a completely literal translation. My Spanish is not good enough to try my own. So, any guess about why her poems generated controversy? Well, my lady is the Viceroy's wife, not the Virgin Mary, and apparently there was quite a bit of gossip about the nature of their relationship, which scholarship has neither confirmed nor denied. But what really got Sor Juana Enyas into trouble was a letter that was, by the way, published without her consent, that took issue with a Jesuit priest who had criticized her love poems in a sermon, and also criticized the fact that as a woman she was writing at all. So she replied with a famous respuesta, or reply. I have posted the English translation on Moodle. It is heavy going, 34 single-space pages filled with mystical references, biblical allusions, historical allusions, but basically she lays out her autobiography, including her early thirst for learning, and then she goes on to defend educating women with examples from scripture, Catholic teaching, and history. I'm showing you my favorite paragraph, which is now my favorite summary of the Christian Enlightenment Creed. How would you sum up what she says in a sentence? Well, here's my summary. It is never an offense against God to study the universe he made, or myself, whom he also made. But note her use of the word machine. The machine analogy was common in Enlightenment thinking, really based on Newton's mathematics, and some scholars even talked about a clockwork universe. The gods started ticking along, but after that just obeyed Newton's laws. There is no other indication that Sor Juana viewed the world that way. But the story does end badly for our nun. The church required her to sell her books as well as all her musical and scientific instruments. Sor Juana responded by devoting herself to a rigorous penance, giving up all studies and writing and devoting herself to the poor. In 1695, a plague hit the convent, and after tending to her fellow sisters, she died from the disease around the age of 44. Just one last comment before we move on. I found this painting on a website for today's Latina artists, although I couldn't find the artist's name. This, too, is clearly an homage, a little bit like our swing after Fragonard, though perhaps not as ironic. But what difference do you notice between the two paintings? What has the artist changed when she did her homage? Didn't cut off her head. Well, I would say that this more recent Sor Juana looks more mestizo, a figure more readily identifiable as Mexican. Actually, chances are that the 18th century portraits are more accurate. Sor Juana's ancestry is not is recorded as Spanish and Creole. Creole is Spanish born in the New World, although it doesn't automatically rule out some native blood. It's possible she had some indigenous ancestry, and her study of the Aztec language certainly suggests that she was deeply interested in the culture. Anyway, I thought this was interesting. But it's too simple to summarize the Enlightenment as the pursuit of reason and the empirical exploration of the world. Yes, the philosophe Voltaire believed that reason should rule, especially over what he saw as superstition and tyranny of the established church. Rousseau, on the other hand, believed that men relied too heavily on reason and should trust their emotions and should trust less in civilization and return to a more virtuous state of nature. So this slide has a selection of Rousseau quotations on the subject of nature and civilization. But women? Well, they should stick with their emotions and stay out of politics, stay at home with the kids, since those emotions make them unreliable participants in political discourse. We will see that this view pervades neoclassical art. We've already seen that it had its way with the post-revolutionary French Academy. But for now, let's note that a taste for naturalism did show up in the paintings of Vigée Lebrun. It's an important way that she departed from the more artificial Rococo artists who were working at the same time and pretty much for the same patrons. Rousseau was widely read and highly influential in the last days of French aristocratic rule. Remember Marie Antoinette play acting at Country Living? In our history terms, the trust in sentiment and feelings, the belief in nature, and a reaction against aristocratic immorality produced a new wave of naturalistic paintings, especially in France. Greuze, too, has dropped off the list, but you saw some of these naturalistic paintings in the video genre scenes. In this French painting, Greuze tells the story of a simple rural family. Note that this painting is as much narrative as genre. So we have the stalwart young couple starting out life with the dowry that the father has just handed his new son-in-law. We see the jealous older sister, the happy younger sister, a community united in support of lawful matrimony. No looking up skirts in this painting. Where else are we going to see this kind of detailed narrative in a painting, although with a somewhat more sexual theme? Yes, our next required work. William Hogarth did not paint bucolic rural scenes of happy and virtuous peasants, but he did reinforce the moral attacks on a corrupt aristocracy in his brilliant caricatures, which were intended really more for a sophisticated urban middle-class audience. So these, again, were very popular with the rising middle class, especially since they were widely reproduced as engravings. That's really where he made his serious money. So here we see the same subject reproduced as an engraving. So what might this story have to do with naturalism? Actually, there is a link. The unnatural nature of arranged marriages and the superiority of marriage based on love was a common theme in literature and discourse in 18th century England. Marriage à la mode was actually the title of a play by John Dryden, first performed in London in 1673, a century before Rousseau, I'd note, and it was based on the similar theme. So here's a comment from the Tate Gallery's website. A la mode means something that is merely fashionable and not enduring. Thus, marriage a la mode is by definition a travesty of marriage itself. In this context, Hogarth's acerbic analysis of the values and motivations of London's beau monde, that means high society, is part of the debate about marriage and sexual ethics that escalated from the late 17th century. The website and the Khan Academy video also noted that the paintings were a commentary on taste and connoisseurship in art, really making fun of aristocratic taste, or at least the taste of the youngsters. Their parents seem to have had better taste. So here's an earlier Hogarth engraving on the same scene. Again, I'm going to read from the Tate Museum commentary. Quote, two effete connoisseurs are in raptures over a tiny and seemingly insignificant cup and saucer. Meanwhile, a richly dressed lady examines another luxury item, a black page boy in a turban. As a servant, he acts as a satire on his masters, who are themselves slave to fashion and fripperies. But he also embodies the perceived exoticism of the Orient, in particular the Turkish harem, which for Europeans was the embodiment of sexual excess and fantasy. Stay tuned for our Angora work la odalisque. At any rate, significantly, a similar page boy figure appears in scene 4 of Marriage a la Mode, which involves an adulterous wife. And that's all for now, folks. Quite deliberately, your homework Khan Academy video included lots of really interesting detail about Marriage a la Mode, and it's all in the detail. And you'll learn more, I hope, from the student presentation next class. I'm not going to spoil the presentation, and I'm not going to save you the trouble of doing your homework. In my next lecture, I'll return to David and look at neoclassicism in France and also in the United States of America.